Hello and welcome to my review of the final episode of Game of Thrones Season 8, which also marks the final episode of the series. For almost a decade we've followed these characters through their trials and tribulations, and now we finally get to see how the show concludes, and the answer is, it's rather disappointing. The episode begins with Jon, Davos and Tyrion wandering through the ruined streets of King's Landing, overwhelmed by the death and destruction Dany has unleashed. The scene reminded me of pictures I've seen of the aftermath of events like 9/11, and I think it did a great job of showing the absolute horror of war. They soon come across Grey Worm and a number of the Unsullied who are executing Lannister men. They try to prevent the killings, but having been a slave for so long, Grey Worm can't understand that these men really didn't have a choice but to fight for Cersei. It seems Grey Worm's decency died with Missandei, and now he's little more than a killing machine who will cut down anyone who dares oppose Dany, even if they've surrendered. Tyrion then wanders through the Red Keep, and we see him exploring the rubble of places he's known from when he worked in King's Landing in earlier seasons. We see him in the now destroyed room with the small council where he often clashed with Tywin, but he's not there to revisit old memories. He's looking for any sign of his siblings. Eventually he discovers their corpses under piles of fallen bricks. Tyrion breaks down and sobs over his siblings' broken bodies. He did everything he could to try and help Dany make the world a better place, but it's all been for nothing. The city is in ruins, the small folk have been massacred, and his only remaining family lie dead. Tyrion's belief in Dany is finally shattered, and I personally thought Peter Dinklage did an amazing job showing Tyrion's grief for his family. Jon goes further into the city where he finds Dany. Somehow Grey Worm is there ahead of him, even though we last saw Jon leave Grey Worm with the prisoners. Guess he got Littlefinger's jetpack. Dany appears atop the steps, and for a moment Drogon's wings spread to make her look like a true mother of dragons. Jon then watches as she addresses her army in a scene which really reminded me of the way Hitler would address his people during Nazi rallies. Arya, despite all the death she's seen, is horrified by Dany's actions and sees her speech as a threat. Despite having slaughtered many of the people in King's Landing, Dany claims to have freed them and then goes on to say that she isn't going to stop. She intends to continue her war across all of Westeros and across the Narrow Sea to apparently free all those who are enslaved. Dany wants to set herself up as some kind of benevolent dictator. She's essentially declaring war on the entire world, and Jon realises that this war of hers is never going to end. Once the speech is finished, Tyrion approaches Dany and throws away his hand of the queen pin. He refuses to serve a leader who would kill innocents like that. Dany tells Tyrion she's aware that it was he who freed Jaime and has him arrested for treason. I like how Tyrion admits right away that he freed Jaime and then points out that she just slaughtered a city full of innocents. I'd be very interested to see how Jorah would have reacted to Dany's actions had he survived the long night, but then maybe Dany wouldn't be so far gone had he not died. Arya approaches Jon and tries to warn him that Dany may now see Jon as a threat to her claim to the Iron Throne. As our Targaryen, Jon is closer in line to the throne than Dany, and the people of Westeros would be much more likely to support his claim over Dany's. Dany will also no doubt see Sansa as a threat because Sansa refuses to bend the knee to her. Jon finds it hard to accept the idea that Dany would turn on him, but in his heart he knows that things have changed. Jon visits Tyrion in his cell, and Tyrion tries to convince him that Dany cannot be allowed to rule and that she must be eliminated. He now believes the same thing Varys did, and of course Tyrion was the one who told Dany Varys was plotting against her. He had his friend killed for nothing. Jon tries to defend his queen, but Tyrion points out that in a single day Dany has killed more people than Tywin and Cersei combined. If they don't act now, millions will suffer for it. Choosing between his love and his duty has been something Jon has had to do several times throughout his story. He had to choose between love and duty when he almost abandoned the Night's Watch to fight for Robb, and that choice again appeared when he left Ygritte for the Night's Watch. Now he's having to choose his duty to defending Westeros over his love and loyalty for Dany. In the throne room, Dany approaches the Iron Throne, and this scene mirrors the vision she had in the House of the Undying in Season 2. In the vision, she doesn't actually touch the throne, but now it's finally in her grasp and she reaches out to it. Jon enters the throne room, and Dany comments that she always thought the Iron Throne would be bigger, which is probably a nod to the fact that in the books it is. Jon questions Dany over the slaughter of the small folk, but Dany justifies it by pointing out that she has to destroy her enemies to create a better world. It becomes clear that Dany is beyond saving when she tells Jon that she knows what's good and that other people will not get to choose. For years Dany has been fighting injustice, but now she's become the very thing she swore to destroy. Her transition reminds me of how Anakin Skywalker turns into Darth Vader. Dany tries to convince Jon to rule alongside her, and at this point Jon knows what he must do. They embrace for the final time before Jon stabs her. Jon watches as, for the second time, the woman he loves dies in his arms. Drogon discovers Dany's corpse, and Jon makes no effort to escape. He's willing to accept whatever consequences come his way. Dany was Drogon's mother, and the only person left in the world who understood him. Now he's truly alone, and just as it looks like he's about to turn Jon to ash, he turns and melts down the Iron Throne instead. It's been speculated that dragons are much more intelligent than they appear, though we never really got an understanding of just how self-aware dragons are in the show. They seem closer to dogs or horses in terms of intelligence, but Drogon's final act seems to imply that he's much more aware than he lets on. Out of loyalty, most animals would try to kill the person who just murdered their owner, but Drogon seems to understand that it was the Iron Throne, not Jon, that ultimately killed Dany, as well as the demise of so many other characters. Drogon has a kind of philosophical take on Dany's death, and essentially hates the game rather than the player. He takes Dany's corpse and flies off, leaving Jon alone. A few weeks pass by, and a meeting is being held for all the High Lords left in Westeros. Sansa, Arya, and Bran represent the North, Edmure Tully speaks for the Riverlands, Gendry represents the Stormlands, Robb and Arryn is from the Vale, Yara's come from the Iron Islands, and some random guy has turned up from Dorne. Jon is now a prisoner of Grey Worms, along with Tyrion, and Grey Worm is eager to see the both of them executed for their betrayal against Dany. The characters begin trying to find a compromise, and in a staggeringly strange line, Davos suggests that the Unsullied start their own house. The Unsullied are eunuchs, they can't have children, and therefore their house would die within one generation. Grey Worm wants nothing except justice against Jon and Tyrion, and you have to wonder why he hasn't killed them both already. Why did he bother inviting the High Lords to King's Landing? Tyrion takes the stage and tells them they need a new ruler. Edmure Tully immediately puts himself forward, but Sansa quickly cuts him off. I have to say, this character just gets shit on throughout the entire show, but he's actually a lot more nuanced in the books. I really hate how he's written here. Sam tries to suggest that Westeros should implement democracy, where the small folk get a say in who they want to rule, but the others just laugh at him. It's kind of strange that they seem so amused at the idea of democracy. It's not new to Westeros. The Ironborn elect their leader, as does the Night's Watch. I really don't see why they would be more open to this, as it means they're more likely to find a ruler in a way which means all regions get a say. Tyrion suggests that, for some reason, whoever rules should have a great story. He then says that no one has a better story than Bran. I'd like to take a moment to point out that Bran's story was so slow that his character was omitted from an entire season of the show. But yeah, apparently this has been about a peeping Tom all along. I guess you could argue that given Bran's abilities he'd make a good ruler, but this is the same guy who recently said he doesn't want anything anymore. He no longer has emotional feelings towards his own family, so how well is he really going to fare as a ruler who doesn't care about anything? For some baffling reasons, all the Lords go along with this. This entire series has been about High Lords grappling for power, but now they all seem totally content to sit on their hands and let someone else be king. You also have to wonder why, based on his own logic, Tyrion would think Bran is the best fit to be king. Surely Jon fits a lot better. Jon not only has a legitimate claim to the throne, but he's also spent his entire adult life fighting for the people of Westeros. Despite the fact her own brother is king, Sansa still refuses to make the North bend the knee, so it's agreed that the North will be ruled by her. This makes little sense. If Sansa is unwilling to bend the knee to her own brother, why should anyone else? Also, if the North gets to be independent, why don't the other regions also aim to rule themselves? In fact, Yara was promised by Dany that she could rule the Iron Islands, yet she swears fealty to Bran without question. You could argue that Dany's promise doesn't count following her death, but if that's true, why is Gendry still Lord of Storm's End? For the first time in centuries, every great house is on an even level playing field, and yet they all seem happy to give up their power so the Starks can rule everything. It's also worth noting that Tyrion says Bran's a good fit because he can't have children, and thus every generation of lords would elect a new leader. I feel like he's suddenly forgotten everything he learned about power. The good thing about a monarchy is that it always leaves it clear as to who's next in line for the throne, but under Tyrion's plan I can only see Westeros once again descending into war and chaos over who should be the next ruler. Tyrion's plan leaves the future of Westeros extremely vulnerable. Bran accepts Tyrion's proposal and even implies that he knew this was going to happen, which raises serious questions as to whether Bran has been plotting all this for a long time. He then names Tyrion his hand, which is another very strange move. Historically, Tyrion hasn't been a very good hand. He's not popular in Westeros, the Lords know he killed his own father and betrayed his family, so it's unlikely they'd accept Tyrion's position. Bran refutes all this by saying that it's a punishment, that Tyrion will spend his life fixing his mistakes. Even so, I can't see this holding water with the High Lords. Grey Worm is willing to accept all this, but he still wants Jon Snow dead. He eventually agrees to exiling Jon back to the Night's Watch, though this makes no sense. Firstly, why would the Night's Watch still exist? Its purpose was to defend Westeros from White Walkers and Wildlings. The White Walkers are all dead, and the Wildlings are at peace with Westeros, so I don't really see what the men of the Night's Watch would actually do anymore. What would be the point of ranging, for instance? Plus, a large part of the wall has been destroyed by the Night King, so the Night's Watch doesn't have much of a defence anymore. This is brushed off when Tyrion says there will always need to be a place for the unwanted, but I don't follow his logic. I also don't understand why Grey Worm would agree to all this. He wants to see Jon punished, yet he's happy to send Jon back to a place he called home for years, a place he was even in charge of. Not to mention the fact the wall is far up north, where Jon's surrounded by allies. Still, for some reason Grey Worm agrees and Jon is exiled to the wall. We get a pan across King's Landing sometime later, and the city is in remarkably good shape considering it was burnt to a crisp just weeks earlier. We see some Dothraki walking the streets, which seems to imply that they've settled in King's Landing, which I find to be very odd. The Dothraki are fanatically loyal to Dany. She made them all her blood riders, and I cannot buy the idea that they are content to give up their way of life and live in peace among the Westerosi. They should have slaughtered Jon as soon as they found out Dany was dead. In war they rape and pillage those who they conquer, yet now they seem eager for peace and to settle down. What about their horses? What about their nomadic way of life? Hell, the person who murdered their Khaleesi walks right past them, and they don't even seem to notice. I feel like the Dothraki were given no closure to their arc at all. Grey Worm watches Jon from aboard his ship, and it's revealed that he and the Unsullied are sailing for Narth, presumably to protect the peace-loving people there from the slavers who raid their shores. This is Grey Worm fulfilling his promise to Missandei. Still, with Grey Worm and the Unsullied gone, what's to stop Jon from not going into exile? Sure, Jon's an honourable guy, so he probably wouldn't have this idea, but Jaime was pardoned by King Robert for killing the Mad King, so why can't Bran pardon Jon? You have to remember that from Westeros' point of view, Dany was an invader who killed thousands of innocents. I doubt anyone would have a problem with Jon being pardoned. Some have speculated that Jon wants to return to the Night's Watch, as it means no one will be able to make him king due to his Targaryen heritage, but I'm not convinced the writers thought of this. Jon then says one last goodbye to his family before heading north. Sansa apologises for sending Jon into exile, but I feel like she should really be apologising for revealing the secret of Jon's parentage and causing much of the chaos that ensued. We later see her be crowned Queen of the North, and it's kind of weird how Sansa learned all these lessons from some of Westeros' most evil players, and then in the end embraced these lessons and spread information about Dany and Jon in order to make herself queen. I feel like Sansa is pretty dark by the end. Arya tells Jon that she intends to leave Westeros and sail west. This is a reference to a moment in a prior series when she asked what's west of Westeros, but I still don't understand why Arya would be that interested in going exploring. Her story arc has seen her go from being a Stark to no one, and then back to embracing her family name. She killed the entire Frey family for what they did to her family. She says the lone wolf dies but the pack survives, and she tells Jaqen she's Arya Stark of Winterfell, so I'm not really sure why she's now leaving her family. Bran tells Jon he was exactly where he needed to be, which, to my mind, once again implies that Bran saw all this coming and let it happen. I feel like Bran actually does want to be king and have power, and was willing to let all this bad stuff happen to get in his way. At least that's certainly implied, which is pretty dark. We cut to the headquarters of the Kingsguard, which seems in excellent shape given recent events, and we see that Brienne is now Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. If you look closely, you can see the new Kingsguard logo is a three-eyed raven. Brienne is filling out Jaime's pages in the White Book, which chronicles the deeds of all the members of the Kingsguard. In prior seasons it had been noted how Jaime's was brief and only contained bad things like his killing of the Mad King, but now Brienne is having to use pages to record the deeds Jaime performed over the course of the series. She writes how he took River unpeacefully, how he tricked Dany when she lay siege to Casterly Rock, and how he fought during the Long Night. She finishes by saying he tried to save King's Landing from the destruction of Dany and died defending his queen. While it's true that he did die trying to save Cersei, he didn't return to King's Landing to save the city. He only went back for Cersei. At no point did he try and convince her to surrender to Dany, and he even said that he didn't care about the small folk. We also see that Podrick has become a member of the Kingsguard. I'm sure the ladies of the King's Landing will be distraught. We then cut to a newly formed small council, which consists of Tyrion as Hand, Brienne as Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Bronn as Master of Coin, Davos as Master of Ships, and Sam as Grand Maester. Two of these seem like very odd choices. In a prior season, Bronn had to have Tyrion explain how debt and money lending works, and yet now he's in charge of Westeros' finances and the paying back of the debt to the Iron Bank. I can't imagine he's going to enjoy that or be good at it. It's also confirmed that Bronn is the new Lord of Highgarden, which is very unlikely. How on earth was Tyrion able to deliver on this promise, or why did the Lords of the Reach not take issue with a random sellsword becoming their High Lord? I also find Sam's position as Grand Maester hard to believe. Firstly, the Maester HQ is the Citadel, and they decide who becomes the Grand Maester, not the King of Westeros. There's no denying that Sam is a smart character, and I could see him becoming Grand Maester in his later years, but he has spent almost no time studying for his Maester's links, and I doubt the Citadel would be eager to appoint a young member who stole from them and fled the Citadel to such a position of power. But let's say Bran was able to pull some strings and get Sam the job. Why would Sam want it? Maesters, like members of the Night's Watch, are expected to give up all lands and titles and are not allowed to marry or have children. Sam loves Gilly. He's the stepfather to little Sam, and Gilly is pregnant with Sam's child. Either Sam has abandoned them, or more likely, Bran has pulled some strings and allowed Gilly and the children to stay with Sam at King's Landing. I guess we're supposed to assume the latter, but it feels like the writers once again forgot. Sam reveals that he's been working on a history book that covers the events of the show. It's called A Song of Ice and Fire, and this reminds me of how Frodo writes a book called The Lord of the Rings at the end of Tolkien's trilogy, though it feels way more forced here. Tyrion is surprised to learn that he's not mentioned in it at all, which I find impossible to believe. Tyrion was one of the major players in this story, and I don't see how you could tell it accurately without mentioning Tyrion. He was acting hand of the king for Joffrey, he was the master of coin, he married Sansa Stark, he killed Tywin Lannister, he served as Dany's hand, and now he's Bran's hand. How could he possibly be admitted? It's mentioned that Drogon was last spotted heading east towards Volantis. It's worth noting that Volantis is very near Valyria, which was the original home of the Targaryens, so maybe he's going to lay Dany to rest in her true ancestral home. Bran mentions he might find him. Maybe he just wants to make sure Drogon's gone for good, or maybe he has plans. I get a really sinister vibe from King Bran. The scene ends with Tyrion telling a joke about how he once brought a honeycomb and a jackass into a brothel. We've heard this line several times before, but we never get to hear him finish it, and we don't get to hear it finished here either. The final scene of Game of Thrones sees Jon escorting a group of wildlings north of the Wall. It's possibly he's just riding with them for safety's sake, but I also get the sense he may be abandoning the Wall and is instead going to live for himself as a free man in the wilds. Tormund once told him he has the true North in him, and I like the idea of Jon leaving Westeros behind and living his days out in peace with Ghost. Maybe he could even fall in love with someone who doesn't die horribly. For the whole series, people have been fleeing south from the White Walkers, but now they're able to return and go boldly back into the north without fear. We see a plant growing through the snow, indicating that winter is ending and spring is coming. Like our characters can finally heal from their trauma. So there you have it, the most popular and talked about television show of all time has come to an end after almost 10 years on air. I've got to be honest, this season wasn't at all what I was expecting, and I'm very disappointed by it. I've spent so long immersed in this world, and it feels like they screwed it all up at the last minute. Sure, the show has certainly had its ups and downs over the years, but up until now it still felt much stronger than the vast majority of shows on TV. This final season really felt like the writers just couldn't wait for it to be over and wanted to wrap it up as quickly as possible, without caring too much for the details that made the show great. I can understand that David and Dan are probably feeling burned out after so many years working on one project, but if that was the case, then they should have handed it to some fresh people who still had a passion for it. While I have found this last season to be very underwhelming, I do want to say that it's really only the writing I find fault with. The show was still excellent when it came to the acting, music, costume design and special effects, and I want to give a big shout out to all the people who worked on the show and continued to give it their all. I will also say that despite the poor last season, Game of Thrones still, and probably always will, hold a special place in my heart. As a child I loved and grew up with Tolkien's Middle-earth and Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings films, and as an adult I was able to explore a new, more adult fantasy world with Game of Thrones. Were it not for the show, I never would have read George R.R. Martin's books. I have so many good memories connected to Game of Thrones that I still see it as a very positive thing in my life. It would have been so great to have an ending that was worthy of the overall quality of the show, but I'm more interested in the journey than the destination. I look forward to seeing what the new spin-off shows we get, and what Blood Moon's like, and of course I eagerly anticipate the release of the books. If you enjoyed this video, then please give it a like, leave a comment, and share it with your friends. That really helps my channel to grow. If you're new here, feel free to subscribe. See you next time.